With the fairly recent announcement of Gears of War E-Day, there are a few questions that people and myself had around the story of the game. How far will the developers go back in the history of the Gears universe in this game? What new characters will show up that potentially died off before the first Gears of War that we've never seen in game before? Or characters that will return that are now dead, the likes of Dom or Ty being two that I can think of in particular? And how will the story itself cap off? Potentially how the first Gears of War started. However, being logical about things and doing a bit of digging myself, I think I've got a pretty good idea as to how the story of Gears of War E-Day will start and then end. Now, this isn't a spoiler as such for the game. This isn't a leak. All of this information has been on the internet in novels, comics, games, and much more for pretty much decades now. So if you don't want to know anything about Gears of War E-Day and go into the game fully blind, then I'd advise clicking off this video. But if you want to go into Gears of War E-Day with all of the knowledge of the lore, the backstories of things, and how we got into E-Day and beyond, then stick around for this lesson of lore. This will be covering almost every big event in the history of the Gears of War universe leading up to Emergence Day. It's very interesting, I have to say, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. Now, it's important to preface that this is going to be a story explained from the very first events of Sarah going into Emergence Day. So this isn't going to be the story explained for Gears of War E-Day, because if you don't have the game yet, nobody knows what the story is going to be like. But this will be an Emergence Day story explained from the beginning all the way leading up to it. Key characters, key things that went on in the universe leading up to that point in time, and the motivations for Emergence Day and why it happened. And then hopefully from that point onwards we can piece together what the story might be like in Emergence Day. But I'm very excited for Gears of War E-Day. Hell, just another Gears game to play and get excited for. It's been so long since Gears of War 5, or at least feels that way anyway. Franchises like Gears of War and Halo have been really poorly treated by Xbox in the last 10-15 years, and I really hope the next iterations are as strong as the original trilogies were. And, well, is what the console, the Xbox, needs at this time. So without further ado, leave your comments down below and your thoughts of Gears of War E-Day, the story. What do you think it's going to be like, and what direction do you think it's going to go? And let's dive straight into this. Gears of War E-Day will take us way back into the history of the lore of the Gears of War franchise. This will be the perfect opportunity for fans of the series to understand how the Gears universe started, how we got to where we are today. And many people like myself love the lore of this franchise, the comics, and understanding the bigger picture of how we got to this point. But the point is of these videos that not everybody has that same passion, not everybody has the time to be able to go back and do that, and many aren't really that bothered of going back and looking through hundreds of different books just to get to the point. So that's the reason for these videos, to look back and to give you an overview whilst listening to it in the background whilst cooking dinner or falling asleep or whatever you need to do, and get up to date with what's happening. It's important to note that in this video itself, because it would be an hour or two long, I'm not going to go into detail of Marcus and Dom's story. That will be in a separate video that will be created, and one that will be released after this one has come out. So be sure to stick around on the channel for that if you want to hear more around how Dom and Marcus became the brothers that they were, and how they originally met, of course leading up to Dom's death in Gears of War 3. So let's go back to the start of the Gears universe, the start of Sarah, and how things escalated from then to the ending, of course, of Emergence Day. First of all, let's kind of go into it in a little bit of a storyboard fashion. What we've got to think about is the start of Gears of War 1, where that took off, and from that point onwards trying to connect the dots as to where we think that Emergence Day will start and how that game looked to end. The game is covering Emergence Day, E-Day, the day that the Locust invaded Sarah, which is one singular day. So how long is that going to take place, right? And I think that's the one thing that we need to look into, and the one thing we need to be very clear on. So it's important to know that 10 years after Emergence Day, so 10 AE, Marcus was a court-martial for a dereliction of duty during the fall of Ethera, in which the Locust invaded and occupied Ethera. Marcus abandoned his post to try and save his father, Professor Adam Phoenix, after receiving a distress call. Marcus failed to rescue his father, and because of that, the Locust, well, they took Ethera, forcing the Cog to relocate to Jacinto City. Marcus, because of this action, was sentenced to 40 years at the Jacinto maximum security prison. However, of course, he was only in there for 4 years because, well, Dom pardoned him, and, well, he joined Delta Squad. So we've got a good 10 years here, from E-Day happening to around the time where Gears of War 1 took place. Of course, Gears of War 1 took place in 14 AE, but around the time where Marcus was imprisoned would potentially be the ending of Gears of War E-Day, or around about that time, setting it up nicely for the start of Gears of War 1. So we've got a lot of time, a lot of gameplay, a lot of story that can be made out of E-Day, this game that's coming out that's meant to show us the relationship between the early days of Dom and also Marcus, the likes of bringing Ty back and other characters that we may not have seen before, or characters that were within this time frame that may have died in Gears of War 1, 2 and 3. It'll also be really interesting to see how far back they go in terms of telling us the story, right? E-Day is one of arguably the biggest event in the Gears of War universe. It's the day that started the Gears of War franchise, right? The Locust are the biggest part of the franchise in terms of enemy and the antagonist, and they were the reason why Gears of War 1 was such a big hit. How far back in the lore and the universe will they go to paint this picture of how the universe started to how E-Day started to where we are today within Gears of War 5 and potentially going forward in Gears of War 6? Look, either way, we've got 10 years of war between the start of E-Day to essentially when the ending of this game should theoretically end. It's going to be a really raw type of game, one where the COG aren't really going to know how to fight these things. They're not going to understand what they are, the power, the brute force of these Locusts. It's going to be a really interesting time. But without rambling on anymore, we've got a lot to go through in this video, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to start from the very beginning, starting off with the humans of Seran, and continuously going down in order of every single big event that's happened in the Gears of War universe leading up to Emergence Day to really paint the picture as to where we are and how we got to where we are today. And I think it will really help people to make an understanding of the Gears of War universe, and I think it's going to be very helpful going into this game as well. But without further ado, everyone, let's jump straight into the timeline of Gears of War's universe. Humans are also known as Serans, and they are the main race of sentient life on Sera's surface. The humans of Seran are a rich people of history and culture with multiple races and ethnic groups. Some of these ethnic groups and races are known as the Gorasni, also known as the Indies, the Kashkari, the Locust, which we all know too well, the Ostrenes, the Pasangus, the Sheoshi, the Tenads, the Tyrans, and the Vascaris. Many of these different groups and races were at some point at war with one another, as we expect and know in the real world that's also the case as well. Religion and race within Seran is very diverse. The majority of Caucasian immigrants in the South Islands adopted their native custom to the Tyran beliefs, which based off legends of demons kidnapping children. But the majority of people of Seran follow the Octus canon and the COG principles of order, diligence, purity, labour, honour, loyalty, faith and humility. We'll talk about this more shortly because it's very important. The more popular sport in the human culture is thrashball. As we know, our good friend Cole was a thrashball player. In post E-Day Seran, some humans practice writing letters to their lost loved ones. The South Islanders believed that one's body was sacred until the soul leaves it. The body was then viewed as a husk, but the soul can leave the body before the person physically dies. There was a huge event in the history of Seran and humanity that nearly destroyed the whole of Seran and ended the human race altogether, and this is a critical part of the history of the Gears of War universe. This is known as the Age of Armageddon. The Age of Armageddon was a millennium-long conflict that nearly destroyed Seran. This age almost led to the human race's total destruction. However, the Seran people eventually rejected the concept of war. We then entered a stage of history named the Age of Silence. This period saw the development of a new cultural and intellectual renaissance, with the advancements of arts, scientific endeavours and cultural pursuits being key social priorities. Human culture also became increasingly demoralised, as the people's energies were channeled more towards improving the quality of life and the resolution of the past military conflicts, leaving little need for large armed forces to be maintained in spite of occasional skirmishes. However, all was not perfect, as we can imagine. Concerns over crime and the protection of the civil liberties were prevalent in this period, as both state and society debated the balance between freedom and security. But even this was nothing compared to the growing energy problems on Seran at the time, as existing hydrocarbon and nuclear fuel sources became very scarce, pressuring humanity to find and exploit new sources of energy to maintain themselves and their lifestyles in the long run. This is where we enter the true Golden Age. This was the name to describe the economic boom that resulted from the discovery and subsequent exploitation of emulsion following the Era of Silence, and was a major turning point in Seran's history. With the discovery of emulsion and the invention of something called the light mass process, this was essentially a refining process that turned emulsion into a valuable and usable fuel. This was an entirely new industry that quickly grew into being and supplied thousands of new jobs, as the planet's energy problems seemed to disappear with an influx of new, cheap and abundant sources of energy. However, a few problems had come from this method of gaining energy. Those involved in the immediate extraction and processing of emulsion suffered from a variety of health complications and shortened lifespan as a result of the exposure to the substance, though this was largely considered to be a small price to pay for Seran's energy security. These health concerns would eventually reappear nearly a century later in the form of something called rust lung. Eventually, however, the rampant speculation on emulsion and the ever-increasing demand for the substance led to a major financial collapse and eventually something called the Pendulum Wars, ending the Golden Age or the Gold Rush. Just before, however, we move on to the information around the Pendulum Wars, because this is a critical part of information that we do need to talk about, we need to speak about a few key people in the lore and two documents in particular that are very important. Alexei Desipish and Nassar Embry, both imperative to the COG's history and the actual formation of the COG itself. Alexei Desipish was an uncompromising socialist who created the concept of the coalition before the Pendulum Wars. He based the coalition on an obscure world government philosophy revolving around 8 guiding principles, ones that we mentioned earlier on: order, diligence, purity, labour, honour, loyalty, faith and humility, that he referred to as the Austere Canon. The Austere Canon was a philosophical document authored by Alexei Desipish during the earliest years of the Age of Silence. Throughout the Austere Canon, Alexei developed his philosophy of world government, which revolved around those 8 concepts. These concepts significantly influenced the likes of Nassar Embry and the other Allfathers at the time, who were responsible for the creation of the COG, and they were incorporated these 8 concepts into something called the Octus Canon. Now, the Octus Canon was a founding document of the COG, which was created by Nassar Embry, who was the Allfather Prime and the founder of the COG at the time. The Allfathers attempted to adapt the socialist concepts of the Austere Canon and tried to implement that into the COG. But not only this, also the political side of things, the cultural side and the economic reality that it produced by the discovery of the Lightmass project. These statesmen believed that this fusion of technology with social moral principles offered a chance to create an unified and ordered Seran, which would easily prevent anything like the Age of Armageddon from happening ever again. Within the Octus Canon, there's a section referred to as the Order of Life. This was put in there by Nassar Embry and the Allfathers to describe their vision for everyday existence within the newly formed coalition, commanding its citizens and members to state and adhere to these virtues during their daily activities. This inaugural section additionally serves as the affirmation of citizenship sworn by every citizen in order to promise their allegiance to the coalition during public events. This was the origin of the COG. This is how the COG started and how it got to where it is today, or at least the beginning of Gears of War 1 and the beginning of E-Day. But there is also another faction that played a huge part in the history of the Gears of War universe that rivaled the COG during the Pendulum Wars. This was called the UIR, or known as the Union of Independent Republics. The Union of Independent Republics was the chief rival to the COG during the Pendulum Wars for many natural resources. The Austrian Republic, which was a coastal nation of Seran, was a leading member of the UIR. A man named Yuri Deschenko was the leader of the UIR during the war against the COG at the time, and he did carry on after the Pendulum Wars, but he was eventually killed by the Hammer of Dawn strikes. These two factions, however, fought each other in an attempt to be the biggest leading faction in Seran. The UIR was a super state that reached superpower status because of their technological advancements due to the Lightmass process. Little information is known about the Union, other than that several famous members of the UIR were from the Austrian Republic and a place called Peles. The UIR used a mix of tactics to fight the COG during the Pendulum Wars, ranging from sabotage attacks on emulsion pipelines to a fully mechanised army that fought COG troops. The UIR's greatest achievement was the creation of the Hammer of Dawn, though, as we all know and love. The Pendulum Wars was, other than the Locust War, probably one of the biggest wars on Seran, and a war I think Gears of War E-Day will cover in great detail. Maybe even having the first mission of going in and capturing the Hammer of Dawn plans and the actual Hammer of Dawn technology from the UIR, and then having them surrender would be a really cool first mission leading into the E-Day. Maybe even having the first mission play as the likes of Dom and Marcus going into, during the Pendulum Wars, fighting the UIR, capturing the Hammer of Dawn, different blueprints and technology, and then having the UIR surrender. The Pendulum Wars, however, lasted from around 79 BE to 0 BE. BE is before E-Day and AE is after E-Day, just for those that may not know. It was fought mainly by two ruling superpowers of Seran, the Coalition of Order Governments, which is the COG, and of course the Union of Independent Republics, which is the UIR, for control of the planet's supply of valuable emulsion. Millions of human lives were lost in the conflict, and the environment was significantly damaged by the usage of several devastating weapons. The conflict was a deadlock for the majority of its duration, until the COG managed to break the stalemate by going around the land warfare with the UIR and staging a daring raid on Aspho Fields. The COG stole the plans for the Hammer of Dawn, and in doing so, gained a considerable advantage in war. The war was ended when the COG stole the Hammer of Dawn technology from the UIR and used it as a threat. Therefore, the UIR were forced to surrender, although it took several years for them to do this. But the Pendulum Wars took a long-ass time to finish, and throughout this war, a lot of different and secret illegal projects took place. One of those projects was formed and led by a very familiar name to all of us, Niles Samsung. During the Pendulum Wars, Niles Samson became a renowned scientist in Tyrus and maintained a high position under the COG's Department of Health. Recognised for his accomplishments, the COG invited Samson to Azura, a secret island designed as a luxury bunker for society's elite. It included a research facility for the greatest minds of the COG. The mission was to rebuild the world should Seran fall into global annihilation, essentially have another Age of Armageddon. As a resident and researcher on Azura, his voice was used as an inspiring public announcement to encourage the work of other scientists of Azura. Meanwhile, on the mainland, the miners of Emulsion and their families began to suffer from a fatal respiratory condition called rust lung that we mentioned earlier, caused by the overexposure to emulsion fumes. Due to the COG gaining economic and political power from occupying the majority of emulsion reserves, Chairman Monroe demanded complete confidentiality regarding its health effects in order to prevent repercussions of releasing a toxic fuel source to the public, and thus losing power over Seran. The Department of Health opened the New Hope Research Facility in the Kadar Valley to treat the children of emulsion miners afflicted with rust lung, many of whom were born with apparent birth defects. Based on his previous work, Monroe decided to appoint Samsung as a director of the New Hope facility, leading the research into finding a cure for rust lung. The coalition was found primarily in emulsion miners and residents of township located close to emulsion processing facilities. Fearing the political and economic ramifications of mining, refining and selling a toxic fuel source, the coalition's Department of Health, under the Monroe administration, opened the New Hope Research Facility to house the children of emulsion miners infected with rust lung in an attempt to study the disease and find a cure so that emulsion mining could continue. Dr. Niles Samson was taken to the facility as a director to study the progression of rust lung. Dr. Samsung and the other scientists injected the children with doses of concentrated emulsion on a daily basis. They discovered that emulsion effects on the body led to immediate cell distress, later causing metastasis and death. In some, however, the infected cells underwent point mutations that, if refined, could be considered beneficial for genetic engineering. Through testing, it came to light that one of the children, named Mira, exhibited a distinct genetic immunity to rust lung, and in fact, it benefited from emulsion exposure, gifting her with such attributes as decelerated aging and enhanced immune system. Seeing that genetics were the key to finding a cure, Dr. Samsung allowed his work to branch into transgenics. According to Samsung partner Dr. Torres at the time, Mira benefited from emulsion exposure by displaying a highly responsive immune system. She was isolated in her own private room under 26-hour surveillance. Samsung attempted to understand Mira's immunity to replicate it in other children. Samsung saw potential in the emulsion's mutagenic properties for transgenic experiments. Observing indigenous creatures from the Hollow, he determined that they also held genetic immunity to emulsion due to their habitat. Using genetic materials from the Hollow creatures, including the riftworms, Samsung mutated the children into chimeras called sires, as he saw them as the forefathers to a superior species of human. The children who had become sires lost their sanity and became aggressive and feral, except for the first patient named Ukon. Not only did he retain his mental capacity, but he gained newfound abilities when exposed to emulsion, such as accelerated healing. Able to quickly replenish any bodily harm, Ukon became physically immortal. He had similar sadistic tendencies as the sires and terrorized the staff. In response to this, Samsung and his team created a cryostasis gas failsafe that could block Ukon's healing and make him vulnerable. While Ukon and the other sires were still distempered and continued to suffer from rust lung, Samsung saw their beneficial traits could be harnessed for military potential to end the Pendulum Wars. As Samsung continued to develop sires, he was unable to replicate Mira's immunity and fully treat rust lung. He came to the conclusion that Mira was a medical anomaly. Dr. Torres discovered that her T cells were highly responsive, causing her to age at 50% the rate of a normal girl. Issues arose as the aggressive nature of the sires led to attack on the staff. Numerous employees of the New Hope resigned and leaked information to the public. Private Sid Redburn, a guard stationed at New Hope, wrote a letter to Colonel Tolman urging him to alert Chairman Monroe about this project. Samsung intercepted the letter in the mailroom and terminated Redmond's position at New Hope. Before leaving, however, Redburn left the facility with files and projects on New Hope and Ukon. Monroe was alerted to the activity of New Hope and discovered the imprisonment and torture of children there. Samsung attempted to convince Monroe the experiments had potential to end the Pendulum Wars, but Monroe ordered the facility to be shut down and indicted all scientists involved, including Samsung. Shortly before the shutdown of New Hope and his appearance at the House of Sovereigns to stand trial, a fringe element within the COG personally contacted Samsung. The party revealed their motives as having the best interest of the COG in mind, but were pragmatic in their efforts, criticising Chairman Monroe for his moralistic ways, interfering with true progress. They believed that Samsung's work could end rust lung and create genetically engineered super soldiers to end the Pendulum Wars. Samsung accepted their invitation, and the private party used nether cutting mining to build a secret facility in the caverns of Mount Kadar. Samsung was able to transfer his remaining loyal scientists and several of his subjects to work with impunity. Samsung knew he could not request vehicles for the transfer as Chairman Monroe would be made aware of their plans, so he prepared to move his entire team on foot during the night and in the snow of the Kadar Valley. Before he left, however, Samsung kept several dozens of sires in stasis at New Hope as a control group and built a semi-sentient security system based off his personality to watch over the facility. At Mount Kadar's laboratory, Samsung took his work with the sires to the next stage, seeking to create an iteration that could naturally reproduce. His most valuable subject proved to be Mira, who also became a colleague in their research. As she matured, Niles attempted to create hybrids using Mira's embryonic stem cells and sire DNA. After many failed attempts, he was finally successful in creating a hybrid known as the Matriarch, the first female drone of the Locust Horde, and later reproduced the males of the Locust Horde. The Locusts were genetically stable, healthy, and able to reproduce. It was later learnt that the Locusts were also controllable. Because Mira's stem cells were used in the creation, a physiomagnetic link between Mira and all members of the Locust Horde were established, known as the hive mind. Without a queen's guidance, the Locusts remained unable to learn and grow, to exist without direction. Mira was able to communicate with them, and through the Matriarch, her powers were even more amplified to where she could control the Locust. Dr. Torres and Niles then built a device that would not only hold and subdue the Matriarch, but also strengthen the connection to Mira and beaming into her temporal lobe. As Mira got older, however, Niles noticed a romantic relationship occur between her and Dr. Torres. While Niles personally saw it as inappropriate, he allowed it because he hoped their sexual relations would result in a child for hereditary studies. Mira and Torres did in fact manage to conceive a human female named Raina. Niles discovered that Raina had not only inherited her mother's immune system and decelerated aging, but also her connection to the Locust hive mind. Fearing his daughter may be used in experiments, Dr. Torres then fled the research facility with Raina. Niles was unable to prevent the eventual escape and return of Mira, lying that Raina had basically died during the escape attempt. Instead of settling the matter, this enraged Mira. She became more withdrawn and bleak, showing resentment towards Niles and the other scientists, humans in general, as her sympathy to her children grew, aka the Locust. The Locust then began to exhibit mindfulness and order commanded by Mira. At some point, Niles expressed a doubt of his work at Mount Kadar and questioned whether he and his colleagues deserved to be punished for what happened there, fearing for his life for the first time. Niles then attempted to sever the connection between Mira and the Matriarch, but it was too late for Mira when she finally realised her power. This, of course, was all leading to the most important day in the history of Sarah and the Gears of War universe, Emergence Day. We now know the origins of the Locust, the lore of the Pendulum Wars, the Golden Age, the Age of Silence, and the Age of Armageddon. But all of this was just a snippet with what would prove to be the most catastrophic event in the history of the Gears of War franchise, Emergence Day. Emergence Day, otherwise known as E-Day, was a swift, full-scale coordinated attack, an unprecedented planet-wide assault on the surface of Sarah initiated by the subterranean race the Locust. 6 weeks after the end of the Pendulum Wars, nearly every major city on the surface of Sarah was attacked by the underground forces of the Hollow, using both bioengineered weapons and stolen human technology. All breaches were along the ground line, known as emergence holes, that were basically used as a way for the Locust to come up from underground and through into the cities, in what was a campaign of rapid dominance in a textbook military invasion. There were massive casualties reported everywhere the Locust arrived. Over a quarter of the total human population was killed within the first 26 hours of Emergence Day, and millions of people reported missing. The attack signalled the beginning of the Locust War. The goal of the Locust War was to exterminate the human race, allowing them to colonize the surface in order to escape the lambent and the emulsion-based infections that were spreading in the Hollow. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, the COG responded by countering the Locust invasion with the entire military assault. The Locust Horde was deployed in huge numbers and their forces into major cities on the surface all at once. They were able to defeat all organised human resistance for over a year and had used the spoils of war to gather all available military and civilian technology and weapons, equipment, resources that were used against the COG and a few of the UIR nations that remained after the Pendulum Wars. The Locust Horde onslaught and assault continued for over a year until the Hammer of Dawn strikes, in which, well, the Hammer of Dawn technology was deployed on the Locust-infested areas under newly elected chairman Richard Prescott. Queen Myrrah's declaration of genocidal war against the humans of Seran was to escape the Hollow from the Lambent epidemic and colonize the surface. Fueling the motives to destroy humanity came from Myrrah's hatred of humans for imprisoning, experimenting and torturing the Locust, forcing them underground, and for the supposed murder of her infant daughter that she didn't know was still alive. She feared that humans would not accept the Locust and attempted to control or kill them if they revealed themselves for mutual salvation in resolving the Lambent epidemic. Her motives were also caused by humanity's failure to assist the Locust, as Myrrah employed Professor Adam Phoenix to cure the lambency, but he was unable to do so. So just talking about E-Day quickly before we do end off this section of the video, look, we've got pretty much the entire story of E-Day within that little section towards the end there leading up to it. All of the different factions within Gears of War. We'll have the COG with the UIR, we'll have loads of different factions within that we probably don't know about, so loads of the different cities within Seran coming together as well. Over a quarter of the total human population was killed in the first 26 hours. It's going to show the COG and humanity losing the war. Within the first year, the Locusts were all over humanity. The first year is going to be captured within maybe the first half of the game, and showing that humanity is losing. What are these massive brutes that are coming up and taking everyone out? Just as we saw in the trailer, Marcus doesn't know how to fight these things. They're brand new. They've only just come through the ground, you know? And I think that's going to be the beauty of Gears of War E-Day, is the fact that humanity is in fact on the back foot, which we've not really had in Gears of War, to be quite honest. We've always had, like, the Locust invading, but we've never really lost as such, or haven't really been losing as such. We've always had these big, brutey, COG humans with massive muscles and big armor and loads of testosterone going into these battles and taking them all out and fighting them and going through and winning. We've never ever really seen the casualties of what this would be like if they just lost or were losing for a while. And in the lore of Emergence Day, for the first year, the Locusts were all over humanity. 26 hours it took for a quarter of the total human population to be wiped out. They've got to show this in game. It's so imperative and important that the developers put this across to the people that are playing the game and show them the loss, the struggle, what's happening. I'm very excited to see where they go with this, and the second half of the game show us fighting back leading towards the end of that, or the start of Gears of War 1, when Marcus is trying to save his dad, can't do that, and go from that point onwards. So I'm very, very excited and looking forward to it. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, but yeah, I'm looking forward to this game. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be it for today's video. Emergence Day will cover everything from the Locust outbreak. I'm hoping it will go back from the Pendulum Wars and maybe even mention the Age of Armageddon, the Age of Silence, the Golden Age, that sort of stuff, and give us a real lore recap of everything that's happened in the universe leading up to that point. I think this is a great opportunity to do that, and I hope they really put the time into doing that. And not only giving you that as collectibles, but maybe showing you in cutscenes or terminals or whatever else that might be. But let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, everyone. It's been a long video, probably just under an hour to discuss everything here. So let me know your thoughts down below. And I'm very much looking forward to Gears of War E-Day. Let me know if you are too. And yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you guys next time.